Hey, welcome to episode 200 of the Titanforge podcast. I'm Dratnos, joined by Tettles and Trell as always.
200.
And this week, our special guest is none other than Ellesmere. Hello, Ellesmere, welcome.
Hello, how are you guys?
Doing very well. It's a beautiful Thursday, as it always is when we record our podcasts. And we've got Ellesmere calling in on his phone, so forgive the audio being perhaps a little bit worse than always. And we've got a beautiful photo of him in the suit in front of the car there. That's an icon. That's a classic Ellesmere photo. I knew as soon as Tettles said he was sending over a photo that this was going to be the one.
Thanks for letting me borrow your Lambo, bro.
I got you.
That is a banger photo.
So this week we've got Darkheart Thicket that we're going to talk about later. We've also got 10.2.5 stuff to talk about. Obviously, that is the exciting new patch that's out. I'm sure everybody's been doing all sorts of new patch-related content.
Yeah.
Oh, for
Follower
sure.
dungeons.
Follower
I've
dungeons.
done all of
Yeah, I feel like some of my dungeons, have felt like follower dungeons. I don't know about you guys. It's
Well, that's
Yeah,
because everybody's a follower of twitch.tv/Dratnos.
okay.
I haven't actually done one yet, but I did hear that the NPCs help explain mechanics. Like, that's actually
Wait,
pretty
really?
neat.
Yeah,
That's pretty.
yeah.
Yeah, there's not any comms in my dungeons, so basically follower dungeon.
What are the NPCs gonna become sentient to be like, yeah, jump on the snapping spot to avoid damage?
Dude,
Like
imagine
someone
if
misses
just-
one kick,
Yeah.
and then they just start someone just starts being really toxic to you in the DMs. Just one NPC just goes crazy.
They leave the group immediately.
No, I've seen clips of them like explaining before you get to a pull though, where it's like, watch out, this mob's gonna try and, not this mob, but they'll like, watch out for this air attack or whatever. It'll knock you off the platform or something, like those kind of things, which is very cool. So I don't know, it's cool tech. I'm glad it's there. I'm looking forward to hopefully it developing nicely for, people that want it. This week, though, our guest, of course, Ellesmere, I think has been on the show before to talk about a Holy Paladin, but
he last time he was on the show, we talked about affixes. It was right before the affix
Right.
rework when Ellesmere had the great takes on Twitter.
yeah, because of course there was the big forum post, and this was back in Thundering season, right? When we were like when the conversation about affixes was at its zenith. I guess first question then, Ellesmere, is how have you felt like the removal of the seasonal has gone so far?
I don't like it. I never wanted them to remove seasonal. Basically, in my ideal world, affixes would get changed like this. You would have one seasonal affix, which would give the season flair and like make things. I like seasonal affixes. They're always unique. You get something fresh every season, and it's always thematic based on like the raid and stuff like that. And I think that's really cool. On top of that, I also think you should only have one weekly affix. I'm sick of like bolstering, sanguine, all that shit. Just get rid of all the terrible weekly affixes and just give us one weekly affix. So one seasonal, one weekly affix, and then Blizzard said that they're committed to fortified tyrannical basically forever. So
Yeah.
so then fine, one fortified tyrannical, and then one weekly affix and seasonal affix, and that would be, in my opinion, the best way to like make affixes still interesting and thematic and like give us a little bit of that kiss curse stuff that we used to have with seasonal affixes back, while also removing a lot of the annoyances of affixes currently.
I've actually been on this train for a while that you're talking about, where I think we just have too many rows of affixes, and like I would honestly probably axe the on death affix row. I call the other affixes like utility affixes. It's like, it's like storming volcanic, just spiteful, like they're not spiteful, but like storming volcanic, like random stuff, afflicted incorporeal. I feel like I don't like those, but I think that those have a better like trajectory of being like a solo affix if we're deleting like affix rows. I think the on death affixes feel mostly the same.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, the on death affixes, especially given the unwillingness, intransigence, or whatever around like removing those from things like the dread petals and in Everbloom. That's a
What do you mean,
real
bolstering
sour
straight in
spot.
there?
Yeah, bolstering. Oh god.
I just think that like Blizzard, whenever they're designing dungeons, their job should literally be design the best dungeon that you possibly can. It shouldn't be design the best dungeon you possibly can. After the first bolstering week, come back through and sweep through and redesign all of the mobs that are cringe with bolstering. Like, they have their job to do. Like, they're probably prepping for the next season, or they're like getting ready to design new dungeons. They're trying to roadmap, what we're gonna see next. And I mean, they do have some obligation to fix the dungeons, but at the same point, like, I think if you maybe could streamline that process to make it less of a thing, it would probably be better.
It's definitely a good point that just the on-death affixes are the ones that throw the most wrenches into the dungeons, right? Where it's like, if you look at cases where they've had to go back and change dungeons, a lot of it is because of those specific affixes, sanguine.
Or quaking.
Yeah, quaking on a few spots, but it was bolstering, of course, and bursting in some spots. Like, those are the affixes that really make pulls feel like weird and unfair and whatever. So
raging.
And they had the two conflicting affixes with thundering and quaking. That was fun.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was so rough.
And then you did that during Algathar, the bird.
Oh my
Yeah.
god, on Croth. What a cringe setup.
Or
Another one like
quaking.
that was like necrotic and skittish.
Yeah.
Long ago.
Yeah, because there was like
There was also
raging
necrotic
necrotic back in the
bursting.
day, but that was like actually sleeper, not that bad, because you would just run away at the end of the pack. That was back when raging was a damage amp and not a CC immune, back in the good old days.
The worst one was necrotic bursting at the end of BFA.
Yeah.
I remember when they
Yes.
added that one, and you just see it, and you're like, "How is this playable? My tank is dying to like 6 stacks of bursting."
Yeah,
That
one
came
was
from a
wild.
community vote for MDI. Someone chose bursting necrotic in the community vote.
And then it showed up on live, and then it was just like, "Where did this come from? Who decided for this?"
Okay, yeah, so affixes, I guess, probably another topic.
Maybe we could have Ellesmere back on to discuss affixes
Yeah.
again later.
I literally could discuss affixes for 1,000 years.
I think that all of us are very opinionated on affixes
for
too.
sure.
Okay. Not necessarily what we want to spend most of today talking about, though. I guess another kind of introductory thing before we get into the real meat of the episode is, I guess, just let's talk about what you've been playing this season, Ellesmere, because you, of course, known for wingsup.com, the Holy Paladin guy, and this season pushing on Mistweaver Monk. What was the process that got you to betray all the Holy Paladins worldwide?
Go try and solo heal a singular tree on Mythic Rock on an H-Pal, and then go do it on a Mistweaver, and you will see very fast. H-Pal is just like, the healing is like embarrassing on that spec right now. Like the throughput difference. I walked in on a 420 item level Mistweaver, freshly boosted, and I healed a like 20 fall tyrannical easier than I could on my like 483 H-Val. And that's when I was like, yeah, I'm not playing H-Val for the rest of the season.
That's how you always know, like, when something's going to be just absolutely, well, maybe not completely abyss, but close to abyss or like meta top tier in the season, is when it's like minimal geared and you can just do like twice the level of key that your main could do.
Yep. And I mean, the nice thing though right now is that there's like 3 optional meta healers, right? Like this Priest, Ardruid, and Mistweaver are all super capable of healing really, really high keys. And like they have that crazy throughput. But the sad thing is that there is a huge gap between those 3 and every other healer spec. Like every other healer spec struggles so much HPS wise, like just in terms of raw healing throughput. And part of that issue comes down to dungeon tuning. Dungeon tuning has been very lackluster this season, and there are an incredible amount of insane heal checks and like one-shot checks, and it's not only gating comps, but it's also gating. Very rarely have healer metas been dictated by which healer can heal the best, right? Oftentimes, healer metas are dictated by damage, raid buffs, how they fit in and synergize with the rest of the team comp, right? The team comp always centers around the DPS and the tank, and then the healer just kind of fills in that meta spot. But this season, it's a bit different because these heal checks on high keys are so gated that you literally cannot play half the healer specs and on like at the same key level, which is crazy that they haven't addressed anything about these one-shot checks and these extreme heal checks. It seems like they're happy with them, which is confusing to me. But Ted, it looked like you were going to say something more.
I was gonna say I find it actually interesting that you're saying that the meta isn't balanced, right? Because I actually feel like all of the healers can heal within one key level of like cutting edge level keys, like Resto Shaman. You know, they're gonna have a harder job of keeping your group alive, but like Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin, they do bring things to your group. You know, HPAL brings Diva Aura, 1 minute sacrifice. They themselves are kind of tanky. Resto Shaman brings Vigor. As long as they're able to keep you alive through these one shot checks, it doesn't feel like the amount of it's noticeable. It's noticeable the throughput healing, but I feel less safe with the Disc Priest. I feel like Disc Priest is like a piece of shit at actually healing me.
That's an interesting take.
I mean, their single target priority healing is awful.
Yeah, their spot healing is not great. I'll agree with you there, but Disc Priest does have pretty crazy heal output. I guess I haven't played much R Shaman, but like the gap between HPAL and Mistweaver, just from personal experience on those two heal specs, is the highest I've ever seen, or like the most extreme I've ever seen. And it's exacerbated by the lack of dungeon tuning and the massive heal checks that require you to bring these specs that have insane healing throughput. Like 29 Tyrannical Everbloom is unhealable on half of the healer specs for sure. You can heal it on our Shaman, Disc Priest, and Mistweaver, but I don't see that being even possible on any of the other heal specs. Prove me wrong, maybe.
I mean, Prez is going to struggle, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, but Holy is actually doing. Nax is playing Holy and doing like some of the highest level keys too.
Holy Priest is like the one other spec that can compete because they actually have really good throughput. It's just kind of like why would you play Holy when you could play Disc, right? That's kind of like the catch, because Disc brings a lot more DR and one shot prevention, which is what this season is pretty much about, right? So does Holy Priest have the throughput? Yes, but it's also competing with Disc Priest, which brings way more for group survivability from these one shot checks. So
from like a DPS perspective, it's felt like this season is like one shot checks where your DPS are typically responsible for pressing a defensive or dying, and then your healer, you know, they're there to top you up before the next one shot happens.
It seems to me, I haven't actually pushed any keys yet this season, but from watching groups, it seems like you're either playing a group of like 5 specs that are tanky enough that they are going to self-heal and that they're going to be fine and stuff, and it's just one-shot prevention, or you are allowing yourself to play those kind of squishier specs like Balance Druid or whatever by having a throughput monster like a Mistweaver that can just keep blasting heals into them. But like I feel like there is a little bit of comp, you know, whether or not it feels like you actually need a throughput healer is depends on what comp you're actually running.
How do you feel about Aug Evoker, Ellie? So for those who don't know, Ellesmere has been playing a composition that doesn't run with an augmentation evoker, which is actually pretty counterintuitive to what you're seeing like on the rest of the top of the leaderboard. They're playing a comp they call it God Comp, which is a joke, but they've been playing double mage outlaw rogue a lot. So like how are you feeling about the no Aug? Like what is your read on that?
Well, here's basically the thought process. And the team hasn't necessarily agreed over this season on on Aug specifically.
Yeah.
Me, Nerf and Fu have all talked about the value of Aug in terms of both healer power, tank power, in a season that is often not gated by timers, right? Like this season, timers are really like when you get to the very highest level, timers become slightly more of a factor, but even then, it's like, okay, so what you gain from not running an Aug is you gain more damage, right? Like a comp with that, like Aug definitively does, well, okay, that's actually also slightly debated because it's really hard to analyze exactly how much damage Aug is doing because a lot of the hooks are broken. there's not enough support
That's,
on
that's
the
the
log
problem,
end.
right? Yeah.
So it's really hard to like go into these keys and really analyze. And then also like Og scales differently with different specs, right? Like Og benefits some specs more than others. And so one of the things that, you know, when we talk about God comp with the double mage rogue, the idea is that the Og is generally there to support the other specs, but if you can play a full set of specs that don't need support, then you can instead go for like maximum damage, which was basically our concept behind the God comp. Because both mages can live every one shot mechanic, monk can live every one shot mechanic, and rogue can live literally everything.
Yeah.
Double
And
mass barrier
mages,
is huge too.
double mass
Yeah.
barrier is huge. Mages are super tanky. Rogue's super tanky. So basically, we just ran a comp where like it was kind of like everybody could just survive everything, and then just slam through keys with, you know. But we did run into some issues with tank survivability, especially because not having an Og, you lose Cauterize, you lose a second Dispel. Places like Darkheart Thicket, the first part, I was literally the only poison Dispel, and we would be pulling like 2 cats and 3 poisoners, and it would just be complete chaos
Oh,
because
yeah.
you're lacking
about
you're lacking the Cauterize for
Dwarf,
the
dwarf,
cat
dwarf.
bleeds. You're lacking. We ended up all going dwarf except for me, and the dwarfs did help. But again, that's a 2-minute cooldown, and the poisoners put out poisons like every 6 seconds. So,
Yeah.
Darkheart Thicket was especially frustrating. And then tank survivability in places like Everbloom and Waycrest, where there's just like a lot of really hard hitting mobs and you have to pull really big. It became problematic and was definitely a source of frustration with the team because, you know, me and Nerf were both having to compensate for not having an Og, right? Like I was having to do way more healing. Nerf was having to do way more personal survivability because we're just lacking like so much extra safety from like when you've got an Og not only giving the healer and the tank main stat, the tank gets blistering scales, which is huge for armor.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, you have the verse buffs going out constantly for the whole team, which is just blanket DR. So you're just, and then you have, you know, max health for the whole team, as well as stuff like Zephyr on a 2-minute cooldown, which is super powerful for certain mechanics. Basically, we sacrificed a lot of group survivability in a season where it seemed like the emphasis should be on group survivability, which is part of what caused frustration. And which was part of why I don't necessarily think that like Double Mage Rogue is the God comp. I do think that it's a really good comp and it's competitive.
Yeah.
It's just hard to say which is better, right? On the one hand, you have a comp that will definitely be faster timer wise if you execute perfect because you're not playing Og, and there is a fair amount of evidence that Og was not outputting the same level of damage as a triple DPS comp.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're sacrificing a lot of group survivability for that, and especially putting a lot of pressure on your tank and your healer to basically, you know, yeah. So I don't know. That it's complicated. I think Og is very good, but I also see the other side of it where it is true that typically when you look at these runs, teams that are not playing Og are faster. But yeah.
I did think it was really interesting watching your comp play compared to the other, like I think which is the meta now, the Boomkin Mage Og Priest Healer comp, and I feel like the Og comes back online with like normal damage numbers when a Priest is reintroduced into the comp. I feel like that's been the big missing part for a lot of groups this season that are playing Mistweaver, where Og doesn't have a PI to align its cooldowns with. If you have a strong PI on like a Boomkin, for example, plus an Og at the same time, that is a lot of damage. And I feel like
Moonkin needs Og to be successful because they're otherwise just going to die. But you don't line up your CDs with the Moonkin whenever you're playing the Og. You're lined up with the Mage the entire time.
Well, I mean, you still PI the Moonkin.
Oh, yeah, you're PIing the Moonkin, but the Og is synced to the Mage with Eons, right? Moonkin just does a lot of damage.
You're still PIing with Eons, right? So.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So my point is, like, I think that's the closest you can get to the double mage rogue damage at least
Well,
with,
yeah, and that
with an
was
Og
part of
comp,
it
right?
is that we were pretty convinced that like Rogue was it. Like that Rogue was really, really, really good. But the thing is, Outlaw Rogue does not work well with Og. Those do not, they don't synergize well at all.
Yeah, its damage profile is so flat.
Yeah.
Same with the mages, honestly. Like, well, they're a little bit more bursty this season, but for the most part, mages are pretty flat too.
Moonkin has an incredibly flat damage profile too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like we were looking at logs, and I don't know what it is specifically. I don't know if it's like Outlaw doesn't scale well with main stat, or like they're already stacking verse so high that their verse from the Og is getting DR'd. I have no idea. But every time we looked at logs, we were like, okay, Og plus Rogue is not good. Like the Og is losing so much damage because of the Rogue. It also could have just been hooks being trash, which is highly possible. But yeah, in general, it felt like Og plus Rogue was not going to happen. And we felt like Rogue was really, really, really good. And obviously we had JPC, who's like the best Rogue in the world. So it's hard to not want him to play Rogue, especially when he's like pumping insane numbers. And Rogue is just infinitely survivable. You know, it never dies. So because we were playing Rogue, we were kind of like, okay, we're not going to play Og as long as we're playing Rogue, because whenever, and then the other thing is like, if you have Og plus Outlaw, then on big AoE packs, like the Outlaw's target capped, and then Og is just amplifying the target cap. So you're just lacking like so much AoE damage on these big pulls if you play that comp. You're basically running 2 DPS instead of 3.
I think people really underestimate like how much Bring the Player matters for this season. I feel like
oh yeah, for sure.
There are a lot of classes that can fit pretty well. Like you can like play some decent like 3 DPS compositions if you kind of work around it, trying to figure out like what works together well. But man, if you bring in good players into the fray, like your success rate is going to go up like a significant amount, but like just by playing with better players, because they're going to make less mistakes. They're going to have fewer deaths. A lot of the times, unless you're actually doing a 31, the timer should be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And that's part of the like the keys this season have been gated way earlier by one-shot mechanics than they have by timers and throughput. And I think that that's a concerning trend that I'm seeing, where Blizzard is putting more emphasis on CC control and interrupts and heal checks and survivability, and they're putting way less emphasis on throughput. And the thing that I think they might be missing is that, take a look at affixes. What affix is like almost highly regarded as one of the best affixes ever? If you were to get. No. Seasonal affix.
Oh, seasonal.
What are seasonal affixes? I think that
what's like
Awakening.
Encrypted is like Encrypted is like the Mythic Plus players.
I mean, if you look at it right, like
Encrypted, Awakening, and Reaping, right? Those 3.
And Shrouded as well, right?
I'm a big Shrouded fan. I like Shrouded a lot.
Shrouded was fun.
Yeah.
My point is, most of them, if not all of them, were throughput based, right? And like Reaping, for example, was just like massive waves of AoE, and how fun was that? And it's like it wasn't a lot of mechanical checks; it was just huge throughput pulls. That was super fun. And I think Blizzard has gotten a little obsessed with making things difficult and intricate, and wanting to put a lot of emphasis on utility and, you know, kick coordination and CC coordination and all this kind of stuff. And I get that from like an esports perspective, like that's interesting, but like for the majority of players, and I would even argue for esports players, for every level of player, like you guys can, you know, play devil's advocate, tell me I'm crazy, but
no, you're not crazy.
Throughput should always be the focus. I feel like throughput is like what people have the most fun with. Let me pull 15 mobs and just blast like 3 million DPS and have fun, you know? I don't want to have to pull 4 mobs
maybe I'm
at
a monkey,
time.
But I think the doties are too complicated. Like,
maybe
I'm just bad, but like, dude, that first area of Rise is just like,
yeah. And I mean, and you know, look at almost any, like go into, open up MDT and go into not good offensive and click on some mobs. Like half the mobs in there have 3 or 4 abilities.
Yeah.
And
they used to have more.
And they all have to be stopped or kicked, and it's just, it's not as fun when you're pulling 3 or 4 mobs and have you have to have really high CC coordination. Like I get that either way, it's the same thing. It's just putting an emphasis in a different area. And I feel like I've seen a trend of M Plus starting to put way more emphasis into non-throughput checks instead of throughput checks. And in my opinion, that's the wrong way to go. And I would like to see a return to simpler mechanics and more throughput based.
I totally agree. I feel like every time we get a new dungeon set, they are so overloaded with mechanics, and they always have to pare them back. And like in season 1 of this expansion, they did a really good job. They were paying a lot of attention to M+. But recently, the longer the X pack goes, the less attention they typically pay. And so we get a season like this where I think on week 2 of the season, we were all getting one shot by like every single mechanic already, which hopefully it wouldn't be a problem until like months into the patch. You like to hit throughput checks first, like you said.
Yeah, it's tough as well because like if the mobs have too many abilities, then we're just gonna, especially if also the timer is so lenient, then we're just gonna pull 1 pack at a time, right? And we're gonna be like, it's less hectic and less mechanically intensive than if you're actually pulling a bunch of mobs, right? Like Atomic back in the day, right, where you would do like a big old pull at the start of the dungeon, and that like we will add enough to get to mechanical complexity. And also there will be a throughput requirement involved. And that, I don't know, this season in particular, given that in a lot of cases you're playing with like the timer is a sure thing if you're not going to wipe, that leads to throughput not mattering. And it's sort of like in Raid as well. Anytime there's a Raid boss where there's a phase where your damage doesn't matter, it's just so much less interesting to optimize that fight from that point, right? Like look at Fire Act P1 and it's just like, I don't actually need to do, like, the only thing that matters is living here, right? And like, to some extent there's skill in having that insight and telling your raid that and having everybody get that, but it's a lot less fun for me than fights or phases in fights where you need to do the dance properly and squeeze every point of damage as you can because all that damage is relevant.
So, and for what it's worth, I think that like, I don't think that inherently that's bad in small doses, right? Like, if there was, 1 or 2 packs in a dungeon that, required that and you had the option to pull them because they were good count, but right now it's like every single pack and it's exhausting mentally also. Like keys have become really, really mentally taxing. I've been doing push keys a long time and there is a huge difference in terms of the mental burden and mental tax and just the like skill requirement and weak aura requirement and all this shit. Like there's a massive difference between years ago and where we are now. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And it's happening in Raid too. It's kind of rampant in all PvE content right now. And I would like to see next expansion, I would like to see kind of a return, a revert, if you will, back to more throughput based, more, make tighter timers, but make easier mobs, and then force us, like Dratnos was saying, force us to do bigger pulls. We should be able to blow through the dungeon. If you can just blow through the dungeon pack by pack and chest the key, that's not good. That's bad design. Like every key this season, we start out the key before we put the key in. We're just like, just remember, guys, don't die, and nothing else matters. Like we will chest this key no matter what, as long as we don't die, and it's true. Like, and that's not good, right? M Plus is missing the damage optimization, the route optimization. It's now just straight line and make sure that you don't die to anything, and make sure that you don't overlap CC.
What do you think makes this season much more popular than last season? Last season, I don't even know what it was. It just felt awful. Like in popularity wise too, the numbers were way worse.
I don't really know. I mean,
it felt worse to play, but I can't even tell you why, because like all the things that you're saying were more true about last season, but this season feels better to play, which is a weird situation, right?
Yeah. I definitely didn't enjoy keys last season. Like I didn't enjoy the dungeons last season. I think the dungeons this season are like the dungeon set this season is definitely unquestionably better.
I would agree with that, yeah.
But as for the like larger spike in popularity, I'm not sure what could cause that. But a lot of these issues that we're talking about have nothing to do with where the majority of the population is playing,
Right.
and where that
Sure.
where that popularity spike is occurring, which is more around the like 15 to 22 key level, right?
Yeah, I think that 15 to 22s are feeling better than ever this season, largely because, well, first of all, they're just kind of easier than they have
Yeah.
ever been.
Yeah,
so
I was gonna say,
people are
they're
having
just
more
pretty
success at
fast.
any given key level, which
So they keep playing, you think?
is nice, but that's tough because that's not really, that's like a power creep problem, right? Where it's like, how can you sustain that season over season? It's at some point there's going to be a, crashing back down to earth thing when there's, but I think it's cool. Like I think that's good, but it also reminds me a bit of Prideful as well, where during Prideful season, people that only did 15s, right? Like people that stayed at 10 to 15 range versus people that were trying to like push up above 20 had just a very different experience with that affix, and it was
True.
like it was a really fun thing to do in those low keys because it was like a moment of legitimate danger and excitement that then rewarded you with something really powerful. Whereas then as you started to get in the high keys, it just warped the whole key around it. And I think the one-shot checks and mechanical overload packs of this season occupy a sort of similar space where I think they work out fine to even potentially actively good in lower keys, but scale very poorly into higher keys. And I'm not even convinced that's a bad trade-off for Blizzard to make, right? Like if we're griping about high keys, it's possible that it's worth it but like I would love it if there was, I think there's tech to make it good for everybody. That would be stuff like scaling factors on abilities that stop scaling or slow scaling past say 20 or something like that, certain abilities, such that they don't become one shots, but they still are relevant at low keys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the simplest solution is that you change the scaling. Right now, you have health and damage scaling, right? And I think if you were to just make it so that health scaled a lot faster than damage, then you're going to naturally be able, like, you're going to naturally be
scaling
able
modifier.
Yeah. Like, but as long as, because if health is scaling way faster than damage, right, then you're going to hit throughput checks way earlier. And you're also, like, the missed CC, missed kicks and stuff won't just be, like, auto one-shots necessarily, depending on how they do the scaling and how they do the throughput checks. And it could allow you to do this thing still where instead of having to pull one pack and make sure you get every stop, you can pull two packs and make sure you get most stops. But that's what you have to do in order to, optimize your damage in order to chest the key.
Yeah, it's just I'm a little worried about, like, I feel like the problem we've always had with tyrannical bosses, for instance, was that those boss fights in high keys just go on for so long because the health gets so high and it gets really boring.
Dungeons just aren't good.
Maybe health scaling the trash more, but not the bosses or something could be a vibe. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, then you'd have a problem with Fort and I don't know.
Yeah,
that's just the problem with Tyrannical, though. Like, Tyrannical inherently has that problem. Like, I remember after I did 500 pulls on Mythic Halandris, I went and did Solil, which was the final boss of Gambit on Tyrannical 28 or 29 or something. And the timer for that boss was longer than Mythic Halandris, our first kill.
It was like 8 minutes or something, right?
It was literally like an 8-minute fight. And I was just like, and it's the same 30 seconds of mechanics repeated 20 times. And it's just like, it's not engaging. It's not fun. It's not like, what are we, just like practicing our single target? Like, there's nothing engaging about it. And that's my big problem with Tyrannical, is that bosses inherently in M+ are not engaging enough and don't have intricate enough mechanics to warrant these massive timers and these like super long boss fights.
I agree.
And I don't think that there's a solution to that unless you just remove Tyrannical, in which case you'd have to remove Fortified, which personally I think is the best option, because I always hear this argument of like, well, I like how trash is hard on some weeks and bosses are hard on other weeks. And I get that. But also, if you have an evenly scaling system, then you're going to always have bosses and trash be that difficult. and you'll be able to like, it's an infinitely scaling system, right? So eventually you're going to hit the same point no matter what. And the thing is, like, then you're not going to have to put like way more emphasis on bosses or way more emphasis on trash. You're not going to have this problem of like one shot tuning that's really, really difficult to tune because, you know, on Tyrannical, you just get one shot by the boss looking in your general direction. But on Fortified, you can do it at a ridiculous key level and be fine. And yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. And I don't think there's like a super straightforward solution because in lower keys, I do see, I think that Fortified and Tyrannical are good and healthy for the game at lower key levels. In the 15 to 22 range, I think it is very healthy. I think it's good to have some emphasis on boss and some on trash, because the reality is at that key level, you're not having this problem. You know, you're not having these 6-7 minute fights that are just slogs and unfun. You know, the bosses are maybe 3 or 4 minutes, which might go on a little long, but it's not that bad. And it does put your emphasis on different things. So you get to like, you know, use your kit differently and play differently and maybe run a different build, more single target based, stuff like that. So I get that. And I get why it's healthy at the lower key range. But at the higher key range, I don't know if they could do something like, you know, at plus 25 key level, scaling jumps, but Fortified and Tyrannical are removed. I don't know. That would never work. That would never be practical.
Fortified and Tyrannical are removed. Holy shit.
Because
just like they're both
because of
active,
greater IO,
or neither active, but like the there's a bigger
like,
jump there. Yeah,
there's a bigger jump, you know, to offset it.
Yeah.
But the problem with that would be like IO would be really confusing. You'd have to revert
Title
IO
would be
back
weird.
Well, you'd have to revert IO back to shared, right? Where Tyrannical and Fortified just share IO. And I think that would be fine. I personally am not really a big fan of the split Fortified and Tyrannical IO system.
Yeah.
I think I preferred when it was just one, you know, and you just did your, and before it didn't work great because everyone just did Fortified because Tyrannical was a nightmare, right? And so all your highest keys were Fortified. But if you're removing Tyrannical and Fortified from the equation, and you're jumping scaling at that same level, then you could theoretically, I don't know. I have a lot of weird thoughts about this, and I know that it's like, it doesn't like necessarily sound great straight. Well, I haven't thought it all the way through.
You know what's funny?
I do think you have really good takes on all this. I think that the Tyrannical problem can also just be attributed to bosses that have timed phases. Like the timed phase bosses are always the 8-minute bosses, you know, just because you get so many of those phases at high levels. I just don't understand why they haven't ever made it so they have all bosses just have like 2 intermissions max if they're that kind of boss. Yeah.
I'm down. Like the problem is so say every trash pack that you pull at like a high enough level adds 5 seconds per on like a Fortified level, right? The Fortified just adds 5 seconds to every trash pack. You don't really notice that. But then say you're doing like, you know, 5 trash packs, and so that's you know, it ends up being like 25 seconds. But then you pull a boss and say that's added, you know, either 25 or 30 seconds onto that boss in an equivalent, like an HP equivalency. But that 30 seconds adds another phase or another wave of ads that you have to kill or something like that. So then that 30 seconds turns into, you know, a minute because you've had to fight like another, you know, 2 sets of soul runs or some shit, right? And you're just like, okay, that's how it becomes a problem. Yeah.
I mean, those bosses are problems even on Fortified. Like the last boss of Galakrond's Fall is still a 6-minute boss on
Everbloom last boss on
Everbloom,
Fortified
same
thing. I've seen 7.5 minute Everblooms on Tyran. It's you know, it's 5.5 on Fort.
Halls of Infusion last season, 6-minute fight, you know, last boss. There's always like these phase bosses that are just cringe.
It's not fun to fight for 7 minutes.
It's tough because like you think about the design of a boss like Yalnu or Ridicron, and it's hard, you know. A lot kind of hinges on the fact that it's like a sequence of abilities, and if it was percent based pushes into those phases, that could maybe be weird. But I like the idea of like limiting them to 2 casts of the intermission, and just like, you know, just a Ridicron won't shield himself a 3rd time. He'll just go back into the rest of his cast sequence or whatever, and you know, Yalnu will start spawning ads or something. I don't know, like.
But in terms of like the design of the encounter, I know that it's not fun to like tell Blizzard, you know, you have to limit the way that you can design encounters and stuff. I think that this could also just be solved by tuning. For example, like Everbloom last boss, just nerf the health of the ad, and that would significantly reduce the timer of that boss. Ridicron, nerf the health of the shield, same thing. Significantly nerf the length of that boss fight. And the intermission phases would be less and Tears nerf the shield that he gets. All
Which
these
they did
like
twice.
shield well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, the more that you do that, the less punishing and less like insanely long. You can still have phase fights that are timer based as long as the phases aren't super punishing and extend the fight by a long time, right? And the problem is right now we have
Agreed.
a lot of fights where the timer based intermissions are very punishing and are extending the fight by like 30 to 60 seconds each time the intermission happens. And the intermission happens every 30 seconds or something, right? But if it only extended it by like 15 or 20 seconds, then it would be fine. So I think part of this could be attributed to like, maybe we should avoid designing these encounters. But you could also say maybe with these encounters that we design, we can keep an eye on how these intermissions are scaling and either reel back the scaling on the higher key level or just nerf it, for all key levels, depending on what they want to do and how it feels in lower key levels versus high key levels. I do think that Blizzard doesn't play enough into scaling and the fact that they have the power to manipulate scaling on a lot of these abilities and could cap scaling. They've done it on affixes. I don't see why they couldn't also do it on bosses and make it so that it doesn't affect the 10 to 25 key range, but it does allow for higher keys to be more enjoyable. Because
like
the problem
Spiteful.
right now, yeah, exactly.
Spiteful's a great example.
Exactly like
It's
Spiteful.
like perfect.
The same
what they did.
concept, except with boss mechanics, or draft mechanics or whatever. And I think that they don't utilize that enough. They've never utilized that in terms of dungeon specific tuning, as far as I'm aware. I think they've only implemented that type of fix on affixes. But I think if they did start implementing that as like a way of hot fixing things that they may have not anticipated scaling out of control, I think that would be really healthy for M plus and for the high key scene.
Amen.
All right. Good. We got a good little M plus manifesto session going there. Always love those. We still have Darkheart Thicket to get to as well. Before we go in that direction, though, there's also a little bit of 10.2.5 to discuss, perhaps, as well. We've got Afflicted. Did you guys see the stuff with Afflicted? I think they fixed this now.
Well, allegedly.
Allegedly, this was fixed, but I agree that should be taken with some suspicion. Where Afflicted was being targeted by Og, like Shifting Sands and Ebonmite and stuff, and it was also being targeted by Razan, and it was also being targeted by
apparently
Solrend
it's still
on Yasma.
Apparently, still getting targeted by Ancient Teachings and Awakened Jadefire, even
Love it.
still.
That is funny.
Which is not good.
Yeah, it's been killable actually. So if like back in Freehold, if an Afflicted spawned, the last boss of Freehold, if an Afflicted spawned and you ran the bombs from the boss over the Afflicted, it would kill the Afflicted. And it still has some interactions like that where boss mechanics can just kill Afflicted and it'll just die, which is kind of funny. But I think that this also probably fixed that.
Okay, yeah.
There's also an example of it just dying, like whatever. I don't know. It got bugged, right? Like on the patch launch. It wasn't doing this earlier this season, yeah?
I don't think so.
Some of this, Ellesmere saying that in Freehold back in last season there was stuff that could kill it, right? But like, it's definitely stuff like it munching Og Evoker buffs is new for sure.
Oh yeah, I don't think I've seen that before.
Yeah, I think more mechanics are targeting it than would have before. Like something goofy happened to it. Although I'm sure.
Yeah, I've definitely never seen it like manually targeted by a boss or something. That is something wonky happened in the patch or before the patch. I don't know.
Yeah, so they're trying to fix it. They've fixed some, I guess, of it, but they probably haven't fixed all of it yet. And
they said they fixed it.
I
have a really good fix for them. Just delete the affix.
I'm doubling down on that one.
Good comms, yeah.
Only some classes can deal with it. Remove it.
Yeah.
And like most of the burden generally just falls on the healer.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I'm pugging, I often have to dispel one and then manually heal the other. And like it doesn't even matter if it's like during chaos or whatever. Like it's bad. And especially like forcing yourself to have to like create comps around. I hate the concept of like trying to get more classes relevant in M plus by forcing affixes and things to like, or like, it's the same thing with raid buffs, right? I think specs and classes should be designed well enough that people, and balanced well enough that people can play what they want, and people can, I don't know, the whole concept of like, the only way of making a spec desired is by giving them a unique buff, or I don't know. Specs and classes and stuff like that should be fun inherently, and you shouldn't have to like force raid buffs and stuff onto these specs in order to make them.
Well, something interesting about that is I see in LFG and in like in Discord servers when people are looking for someone to fill for their M plus group, they now ask for an affix doer, which is just like a development because of Incorporeal and Afflicted coming out. Like
The
you
fuck
need
do
an
you mean
affix
affix
doer.
doer?
I mean, it's kind of nice, right? Because you have Afflicted, you have Incorporeal, you have raid buffs, and you have group utility, and so different classes are good at different of those things, right? Like there's stuff like druids that are good at all of those, or there's stuff like warriors that are good at none of those, or death knights that are good at none of those, right? And it's really fair and balanced, because some weeks you'll want one of those, and some weeks, on some weeks you're like, okay, well, I guess we don't need a warrior this week. But then on other weeks you're also like, okay, well, we also don't need a warrior this week. So it all kind of evens out in the end.
Dude, affix doer? That's just like, imagine just being like, we're looking for an affix doer for bursting. What are you looking for, a healer, I guess? Like, what does that even mean?
That's an Og Evoker.
A disc priest. Yeah. An Og Evoker. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just like it's a symptom of the new problem. Just like raid buffs, like Ellie was saying, now we need to both concentrate on raid buffs and covering the affixes each week.
I just feel like I don't know. It's the same reason I don't like that affixes, that they lean so heavily into affixes to make dungeons interesting and M plus interesting, right? It's the same general concept. I think that dungeons should inherently be interesting and fun on their own, and affixes should amplify that fun. But right now, the way it is, it's like dungeons are decently fun, and then affixes are like this huge drag that they have in order to quote unquote like keep things fresh and keep things unique from week to week. But I think in an infinitely scaling system, you don't need that much variance from week to week. Not like 4 affixes worth of variance from week to week,
Yeah.
Super agree.
I think the impactfulness of the affixes is a lot of the stuff that the lower key crowd likes, and the higher key crowd hates.
No, I actually disagree. Look at it. I got sent this. I think that you also got sent this the other day, Dratnus. Somebody did a statistical regression on popularity of the amount of player base and the amount of deviation that players will play on a specific affix weeks versus not. And there were like some statistical significant ones. Like, hold on, let me see.
Yeah, I think affixes are even more
Afflicted,
miserable in lower
Incorporeal,
keys.
Bursting, and Sanguine all lower Mythic Plus participation by a statistically significant amount, to a degree that probably warrants their removal. Was the conclusion.
I was looking through that analysis though, and the person didn't find any affixes that raise so. It's hard for me to understand how
because it only goes down, right?
Relative to what?
I think it was relative to Control, right? Control was like the best week.
Okay.
It was like some.
But there's not even the affixes that were in that week that see as raising participation relative to the average, right?
It was Control, right? So it would be 0.
Well, that's not. I don't know. I'm not. I looked at it a little bit. I want to look at it more. I thought it was cool. But whenever I talk about wanting to delete affixes, the pushback I always get is from people who are like, no, like I do my 2 15s each week, and it's really nice for me that each week is different than the other weeks. And I'm always looking at that, and I'm like, especially with something like bolstering, I'm thinking like, man, bolstering is much worse in 15s than it is in 20s, right? And it's much worse in 20s than it is in 25s even. Bursting as well. But like those folks are often not even pulling big enough for it to matter either, right? Like they're not pulling 17 packs of Dread Petals or whatever in Everbloom. So, if you're doing literal 1 pack at a time, then those affixes don't even feel bad at the low key levels in the way that they would for us if we were doing low keys. We would feel them really bad. So I don't know. My argument is that they should look at ways of having the affixes drop off in impact as the key goes up. Like what they did with Spiteful is a really good example of making that affix scale well, such that it is you're not just nerfing the baseline such that it doesn't feel like anything in low keys, but you nerf the scaling such that it doesn't take over the high keys in the way that bolstering and stuff does today.
It's so interesting that people complained so much about bursting last week. I've never seen casuals, or not casuals, but like regular key doers get more upset over an affix than bursting. And meanwhile, we look at bursting as like, oh wow, that's minimally invasive towards our timer.
Yeah, bursting is a weird one because it fluctuates wildly depending, like, just from group to group how bad it's going to be for you.
My healer can heal me through that.
It's also dungeon to dungeon, right? Like
Yeah.
you look at something like Everbloom, where there's these huge bursting pools because of all the dread pedal, like we were talking about the on death affix stuff being so variant from dungeon to dungeon. And like you walk into Everbloom and you get like a 12 stack and poison debuffs are going out at the same time from the birds, and it's like it's a nightmare. But then you go into like, Rise or Galakrond's Fall or something where you do much smaller pulls, and then it's like bursting's not even an affix, So I think that's
yeah. And I will say the Everbloom on death affixes I think are egregious enough that like everybody feels it there. That's one that's a little bit different than like that's one where it's why I'm so surprised that Blizzard hasn't changed that, because that is the level of impactful where everybody feels it in that dungeon's like those.
That dungeon's so hard.
The dogs in Waycrest as well with on death affixes, but at least every pug just wipes to that once, and then the rest of the dungeon doesn't have any more dogs in it, right? And so it's fine. But that Everbloom has like 30 of those packs, so I don't know.
Do you guys remember when Sards and Maggots used to do on death affixes?
Yes.
I remember whenever they introduced the technology to remove those mobs.
Dude,
the slimes in Shrine of the Storm.
Tide Sage Initiates in Shrine of the Storm as well. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes, the Initiates still did at the very beginning, the very end of the expansion. The slimes did. Like,
yeah,
that was
good.
Okay, that was crazy.
There was dude, there was like temporary mobs as well that spawned in some dungeons that would do those affixes as well.
I remember that.
Oh
I
yeah.
forget
I don't remember which
specific
mob it
mobs.
was, but I do remember that there was a summoned mob that was doing that.
Yeah. Anyways, always remembers how it's always nice to look back and see how far we've come. And
It could always be worse. Is how
it could
I
always
view
be
it.
worse. Despite the fact that you tune into the Titanforge podcast every week and we're complaining about something, I would say on the balance, it's gotten a lot better, at least on that front over the past few years.
I feel like we're pretty positive, all things considered.
All right, we've got Darkheart Thicket to get to, but first we have our flagship segment, Tip of the Week. My tip of the week is, so I recently made a gearing guide for like alts and stuff, and something that basically nobody seemed to, not basically nobody, but a lot of people didn't seem to know, so I figured I would use as a tip of the week as well, is Enchanted Whelplings crests are actually really OP for gearing up your alts. They let you work order 447 crafted gear very easily, no spark required, if you get Enchanted Whelplings crest, and you can get Whelplings crest from LFR, you can get them from the Emerald Dream campaign, and you can get them by going to whichever dream is the Dream Surge zone. This week, for instance, it's Thaldraszus, and just flying through green stuff in the air. And you can fly around, even Valdrakken, when Thaldraszus is active, has these. You literally just fly through these and get your buffs, get your crests, and bang, 447s every slot if you want it. Very
That's
easy,
not bad.
so super good tip. Trell, what do you got?
Mine's about you can kind of cheese some debuffs this season and then plus. This is like the weird tank tip. If you have an absorb shield on you when the debuff goes out, so like the little spiders in black are cold after the first boss. If you have any kind of absorb when they try to apply their debuff to you, they just skip it. Same thing with the anomaly mob in Galakrond's Fall. I think it's Bloom. I can't remember which cast it is, but one of them has like a humongous dot on the tank, and if you have an absorb, you can just avoid it entirely.
It's Bloom. Yeah.
Yeah, Bloom.
Yeah, it's the Bloom frontal, or not the frontal, but the debuff that he puts out.
Do you know of any others actually, Ellesmere? Since you were the cocoon man, I think those are the only two.
Any other like mechanic mitigation via absorb? It's just
Yeah.
the spiders in Blackrook and the
No, those are the only ones I know of
and
too.
bloom. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that's what I thought. But yeah, those are like two really good ones that you can do, and any kind of absorb can do it. You know, mass barrier might be able to catch it. Mistweaver cocoon's really really good for it. A leaf trinket,
Mass
any
Barrier
other
can catch
absorb.
bloom up until like plus 22, and then it can't anymore.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Does it need to
info.
full
It's gotta be
absorb the initial hit?
Yes,
Yeah.
it needs to full absorb the initial hit. So
Okay.
like 20 to 22 range, depending on if it's fort or tyrannical, you can probably get away with it. But you'd have to hit it like very last second, because if a melee consumes the absorb, then it fucks it. So
Leaf, Rescue, and Raid Shard I think are the most consistent. I mean, Life Cocoon's obviously also insane.
Yeah.
I would assume the rescue shield also then would get
yeah,
as the key starts to get high. Yeah.
Although
yeah. I don't think Rescue Shield works at a high enough key level. I think that probably caps out around like 26, if I had to guess.
you have to press it last second. The problem is you want that on Fortify, but then you also want the shield for the debuff or like the Sands debuffs as well on Fortified, and it's like a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd
complicated as
be
to what you're supposed to use it on.
lobbing that on the tank, because the other thing is, like, if it's a low enough key level, then the tank should be able to live the bloom dot in the first place.
Yeah, see, that's the complicated part.
All right, Ellesmere, by the way, guest. It's, as you maybe know because you've been here before. It's not required to have a tip of the week, but if you've got one, you can lob it now. Otherwise, we can go to Tettles' clip of the week.
Delete your holy paladin.
Okay.
Until
Wings
they
is down.
buff us.
.gov.
Okay,
Wings
here's-
is down until buff.
Then let me ask a question of you then for the week is, do you think that the tier set bonus going back to season 2 is going to be big for Holy
Wait,
Paladin?
is that what they
keys?
picked?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. No, this season's tier set is actually the best. It's just, like, I know that it seems like season 2 would be the best because that's when we were OP,
Yeah.
but it wasn't because of our tier set. It was because we got reworked and we were extremely strong throughput-wise. Then they nerfed us 1,000 times and gave us a better tier set. And so now we're going to get the worst tier set and the nerfs. So
Let me
Looks
just
like I'm not
quickly
gonna be
double check to make
playing
sure I'm not
HL next season.
gaslighting. Yeah. Yeah, season 2
I-
won by quite a bit. Yeah.
Dang.
Yep. That's I guarantee you that's just because we were OP in season
Yeah.
2.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
That makes sense. Unlucky. All right, Tettles, what are we looking at in our clip of the week here? You're muted, by the way. You
God, I muted.
goofball.
I don't know how I muted.
Did you go non-verbal?
Yeah, going on verbal. A lot of people actually don't know this, but if you sigil mobs out of combat, it doesn't generate threat. And you can see right here in this clip, now sigil flames all of these mobs, and they immediately melee somebody who's literally not hitting the mobs. They're still mounted. So this is a situation where whenever you're playing Venge, you need to know that you're not going to generate threat. Whenever you do stuff like this, you need to make sure that you're walking in, you're like spirit bombing, you're going to be like fracturing the pack.
Dude, the mobs are literally looking at
Yeah.
like they're in combat here.
Yes.
I don't know. I call foul. Like, look at this. These
It's-
mobs are in combat. They have targets, and then I guess maybe they're not in combat with now yet. But
They're not. See, that's the problem. Right?
That is wild. Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it's been, but for years this has been an issue with Venge, where Elysian Decree and Sigil Flame just do no threat if they're like the first things you press on a pack. They just deal 0 threat.
Moonfire is the
And,
exact same way with Guardian Druid, but it's spammable, so it's different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they actually fixed this at one point for Vengeance, by the way, in like a 0.5 patch at some point, and then it broke like the next patch, and they forgot about it. So this is the world we're in now.
I mean, it happens all the time. Like I think of first pull of Throne of the Tides. It happens pretty regularly where somebody, the sigil flame the pack, and then it's just like, oh, they have no threat. Don't
Yeah.
hit.
That's like my biggest grievance with Vengeance. I would play Vengeance all day, every day if it weren't for the threat issues.
All right. So it looks like we only have Ellesmere for a few more minutes here, tops. What are we thinking?
Do you wanna do Q&A
logistically
first?
Here? Yeah. What if we do Q&A and then
And then we cut Ellesmere loose, and then we do DHT
Ellesmere-
just us
Yeah,
three.
and then we can do DHT just us three. All right. I
Okay,
think that's
let's do it like that.
I think that's a good sequence here. So we will get to Q&A then, and we'll do Darkheart in a bit. But our first question comes from Theun, who says, do you think Shaman's active damage is still a problem? Ellesmere.
Thanks, Dan. No.
Yeah,
No,
poor
it's not.
Shaman.
No, I do not.
You're welcome.
Ellesmere just gutting Shamans brutally.
Mistweaver's damage is not great either right now, right?
Yeah, no, Mistweaver's damage isn't that great. Like, I mean, you want to look at a priority damage issue. Disc Priest is doing absolutely absurd damage, fully passive, and not factoring in PI. That spec, they need to start balancing healer damage. They just have to. I am so tired.
Nobody tell them
What?
that they're not going to.
No, I mean I know the philosophy behind Blizzard. I know what I read, but I think it needs to change. I don't think it can stay that way. It's like, imagine if you were just like, well, you know, rogues should do way less damage than everyone else because they're more survivable. Or, you know, imagine if they applied that logic and they to DPS tuning, there would be riots in the streets. Like, and I don't know. It's weird to me that they're just like, healer damage is supposed to be variance based on, and I don't even know why, because the thing is, like, every season a new healer becomes the dominant damage one, right? It's not like it's been you know, unique to a certain healer spec, like this is the damage healer spec, you know. Every season there,
yeah,
it used to be, yeah, but like then they started homogenizing it, but then they were like, just kidding, we're not going to homogenize it, we're just going to change it every season to a new healer. And I'm just like, why? Just balance two things. Passive damage and active damage. You balance those both, for it wouldn't be that hard, and they could definitely do it. And I don't understand why there's such a massive discrepancy or disparity between like the top and bottom active damage healers and the top and bottom passive damage healers. I don't know. It's
the fact that
I
it's
could
like
talk about that for
two like 100% more damage from other specializations is weird. I will say
it's so weird.
The issue is that it's not close.
Yeah. If it was like reasonably close and you were like, oh, this spec does, you know, 10 or 15% more active damage, so you can optimize, you know, based on like if you want to play a healer that has a little bit more active damage versus passive damage, that's fine. I don't think, no one's saying that it has to be like perfectly balanced, but you can't have one spec doing double, triple the active damage or passive damage that other specs are doing. You just can't, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the frustrating part. It's not that I expect everything to be balanced perfectly. It's that I don't want there to be such massive disparities.
All right. Our next question comes from Stash Squad in Discord that says, would a Titanforge RNG kind of system be interesting in the current gearing system? I'm thinking a small chance to proc a myth track item from 20s and above, maybe even increasing the chance for each key level, giving a slight incentive to push, or just the same chance across all key levels to get an item at a higher track so the more casual part of the community isn't left out. Same principle could also work in Raid.
I kind of prefer the system that we have right now. I don't know if we necessarily need it to be Titanforge stuff, although it would give maybe a little bit more incentives to be doing, you know, weekly 20, like do like a volume of 20s, right? If you get like a chance.
Yeah.
Titanforge gear? I don't know.
In my opinion, the best solution is to create a Great Vault item that you can purchase with probably 2 weeks worth of your Great Vault, so like 12 tokens.
Okay.
That would upgrade your thing one track, so take you from a hero to a mythic track. So then you could target certain gear at, you know, you could sacrifice your Great Vaults in order to target if a piece of gear was like so crucial. Like, for example, for me, I literally couldn't do high keys on my Mistweaver until I got Farok's Tank Trinket. And so if I had the capability of sacrificing 2 of my vaults in order to guarantee that I could get that item at, you know, mythic track or hero track or whatever, and wouldn't have to just wear like an LFR normal one, that would be, I would do that, you know. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people, you know, Iridol, for example, the staff that everybody wants from their vault. Like, you have a ton of people who are just going to RNG their way out of no staff and have to wear 483 staff the whole season because Great Vault RNG, you know. And so if you could sacrifice 1 or 2 of your vault slots in order to guarantee that you could upgrade that, I think that would be really big for the community. And I think that would solve that problem.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of an RNG proc for myth track from keys. Start of season, I think it would be awful. And then even late season, I don't think it would be good. Although it would be better to do it if you wanted something like that, implementing it late in the season, I would be less opposed than early in the season. But I do think a deterministic item that let you myth trackify your trinkets and your weapons and stuff would be really nice.
Bring back Dinars.
Yeah, I mean even Dinars purchasable with Great Vault currency could be very cool as well. But of course they have. I think it's a little bit more feasible that they would make an upgrade item than a dinar because they don't like the idea of us having like a date on our calendar marked where we're going to get a specific item and we know that's coming. Much as we would like that as players.
Like this would allow you to farm and like put the work in to get that item, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would still allow Blizzard to have their bread and we could have ours.
Yeah, I like it a lot. All right, last question is from Takeosaurus that says, Shamans have a talent that increases damage taken. Can you believe that?
Dude,
They fixed that, which is nice. Shamans basically got a 4.1% survivability buff this week. That's pretty good. That's pretty big because they had, the lore is they had a talent that increased their avoidance, and then in a patch that got changed to reducing their damage taken from area of effect attacks. But unfortunately, because it used to be avoidance, there was like a sign that didn't get flipped that was supposed to, so it actually was still increasing their damage taken from area of effect attacks.
Is anyone really surprised by this?
That's really funny.
No,
absolutely not.
So
I'm just
of course it's Shaman. You know, of course it's Shaman. This poor spec, man. This poor class.
Love it.
I read about
Tough
shit like
Shaman.
that happens, and I'm just like, thank God that's not my class. Thank God that's somebody else's class.
All right. That's it for our Q&A section, so we'll go ahead and let Ellesmere go because he's got an important man with places to be. Thanks for coming on the show, though. Once again, Ellesmere, if you got any shout-outs or stuff you want to deliver or anything you want to plug before you go, feel free.
Of course. No shout-outs. Just want to say thanks for having me on. Always have fun doing this, and look forward to the next one. Have a good night,
See you
guys.
later, buddy.
All right,
Yeah,
later.
see you next time, man.
Okay. Now it's just us, and we have Darkheart Thicket. Yeah, now it's just us with the scene changed, so feel free to adjust your cameras as needed to center yourself.
Well,
Oh, I can fix it too. I can fix it too. Hang on.
No. I cooked. We're good.
Are you sure? Because I could go.
Okay,
Hang on.
stop.
Fixed.
Dude, did you notice that I
Perfect.
spelled Ellesmere's name wrong on that other overlay?
I didn't notice that. No. but
Ellesmere.
People
That's
kept typing it into chat.
That's an Easter egg for anybody who finds that. Anybody who's found that in the YouTube video up to this point, congratulations, you found an Easter egg in the podcast.
Oops.
Okay, let's do Darkheart Thicket though before we depart Heart Thicket, the podcast for the week. What's the, I guess, high level overview of this dungeon this season?
I mean, it's got a lot of one-shot bosses, generally speaking. I feel like if your key's depleted though by about the 15-minute mark, because like if you have like a lot of deaths and you've racked up a lot of deaths on trash like that, and then you wipe to O-card at around the 15-minute mark, you kind of know if your key's depleted or not.
Okay.
Darkheart has a lot of very technical things. It's also got a lot of little bugs here and there that are pretty annoying. It's hopefully we can mention all of them, but if you can get through all that, it's a good dungeon, I think.
Still has snapping.
Yeah, like first of all, if you step on any rock or mushroom in this entire dungeon and you're the tank, or if you have aggro on something and you're not the tank, stuff will snap to you instantly and murder you, or they'll bug out and reset eventually. One of the two.
Yeah, it's also a dungeon with some nice permanent combat bugs that you can easily encounter too. So look forward to that. Particularly, I don't know if you guys get these, but like the roots from Oakheart staying and then keeping you in combat forever if you don't clear them after the fight sometimes. So that's happened to me twice. I don't know if that's really unlucky or what.
Oh, there's a couple other interesting things. I think a lot of this is because it's a very old dungeon, but there's a pack in here that only spawns when a world quest is inactive
Yeah.
in the outside zone.
That
and
one's wild.
It's like one of them in the first area as you're crossing to the first boss, but sometimes that pack's missing, and now you know why. There's also like RNG on what mobs you get in the first area, whether it's a caster or a poisoner, and that can be like critical in how you plan your pulls. Like, do you have enough poison dispels to handle up to 3 poisoners? If yes, then you can combine all these ruiners, I think is what they're listed as on MDZ.
I like to have minimum 2 poison dispels before I zone into this dungeon, though. Like, if obviously not everybody's gonna have a choice, and Like you're not always gonna have a choice, but I if you can, I would recommend at least having 2 poison spells for here. Stuff like Poison Cleansing Totem also is very sick.
That's just, I mean, that's a great effect as well for Afflicted too. Really powerful.
Oh my god, true, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into this first area a little bit more. Obviously, the poisoners.
So
Big for poison spell. What else are we looking out for in the first few pulls?
Okay, so bear pull, it's pretty standard to like triple pull that what you're seeing right there, and that's the only bear that you kind of do in the entire key. Those mobs are, I don't want to say they're like super inefficient, but they're kind of hard to kill if they spawn too many of the nightshade mobs. That becomes a bit of a problem. So that's like the only bear that we want to do in the dungeon. Typically, we're going to be routing around, like we're going to be looking to try to pull as many cat and poisoner packs as we reasonably feel like we can pull. And then we just kind of make our way through the rest of the key. The really inefficient mobs in this dungeon are the keepers and the flowers. So we want to try to skip as much as we reasonably can here.
At least skip the keepers if you can. That's like the biggest thing.
And so you kind of have to play a decent amount of trash at the front area.
Okay.
I think we should talk about the first pull more though. The first pull is actually really hard, and it looks easy once you've got everything down, but there's a lot of moving parts. So there's 3 owls in this first pull. Every single one of these owls needs 2 melee kicks or a stop in between melee kicks to solve their screech cast. So like you can assign someone to each owl on pull, and then typically like your tank will stop the next set of casts, go back to kicks on the third set of casts, etc. On top of that, you have 3 cats that jump and just give people basically Grievous, if you're familiar with the old affix Grievous. And they do an insane amount of damage. You cannot stop their debuff. You can't use Ring of Peace or anything. They just instantly apply the debuff when their cast timer goes. So it's a very hard pull. But because we have Lust is why we do this consistently. And some groups even add the next 2 casters to that first pull once they've got it down.
Assigning kicks to this creature, so like Charles said, is like by far the most important part of that. It's an easy way to wipe it. Like they're only going to get 1, maybe 2 casts of the screech off, and so like most of the time they're just kind of like stunned for the first set of the screeches.
Yeah.
Great time to press a pressing roar too if you have an evoker.
Yeah, Sigil of Silence, Divine Toll. Obviously, depending on which tank you're using, you have a way to do a lot of work to these mobs. But yeah, it's a nice way. I mean, you get 16% from your very first pull there. Do you guys like lusting this on Tyran as well, or is this a fortified lust?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I think it's a lust either way.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Let's talk about the first boss with the what kind of tech do we have for this one?
Well, you can stand on top of a house or on top of that.
Yeah, the like little Moonwell bit.
Yeah, you can stand on top of the stones there to make the Grievous Leap never cast. However, you can get the Nightfall spawns on top of you and summon an ad on top of you, and it'll give you like the debuff and can potentially kill you. So those are, first off, limited use. You never really see people use them. Instead, they try to stand as close to the boss. So it's going to be one person baiting. The Grievous Leap always goes on for this player. And so you have the tankiest person versus physical damage taken, standing at range to tank the Grievous Leap every single time. And they ideally want to stand about 15 yards from the boss so they can spawn the Nightfalls kind of close to the boss.
Yeah, and that's like, I think an important thing here is that that's pretty close to the boss. And so you want everybody else like right behind the boss, but not on top of the boss, because you got to avoid the damage from when he leaps back every time. But you all want to play like as a group kind of close to the boss. The farthest person out always gets the leap. That's the biggest thing.
How do you like moving the boss around? So basically, as long as you can kill the ads off quickly, get them spawned into melee fast, and then move the boss efficiently with the charges, you should be good on space, right? Like, how do you like to move the boss, Trail?
Well, if you do what I just said correctly, then you don't actually use that much space for every Nightfall drop. The Abominations spawn stacked, so they're going to die twice as fast, basically, especially since they're already in melee. And you can also use single target stuns on them to prevent them from moving, because every time they move a tiny bit, they'll drop more puddles. So the goal here is to just control the ads as best you can, and then make very small movements, like clockwise around the room, for example.
If it's if the Nightfall ads like get dropped on the person who's baiting the Grievous Leap, and then like get tethered to him, say it fixates onto him, and they start getting out of melee, you probably want to like CC them to get them to retarget onto somebody else. You don't want them leaving melee.
Yeah, if you disorient them, they'll retarget. That's a good point.
How about the tank part of this? Have you've been DPSing this season mostly, right? But the tank knockback and then charge part is an important part with moving the boss as well, right? Where that I don't know is
Yeah, you got to watch the frontal timer on the
Yeah.
boss because he does 2 instances of damage with that frontal. He does one instantly as soon as it goes off. He turns into a bear, just like one shots a demon hunter if they happen to be dashing across the boss at that moment.
Mhm.
I've never messed up, obviously, but some demon hunters. And
I've
then
heard of it happening as well. Yeah.
yeah. And then he does another big instance of damage like a second later where he just like shoots a line at the tank. And as a tank, if you're far enough, you can actually sidestep that.
And
And
you need
then you
to
like come back and move the boss a little bit on your way back in.
Yeah, the that charge line hit is very high damage as well. So depending on the level of key, that's a big defensives if you're gonna try and live it, or just sidestep it depending on what your goal is. So,
Yeah.
okay. After that,
Also,
we get okay.
Before we move on, I wanted to say like there's a lot of ways to skip that double bear pack right before the boss, and you definitely should. Like Warlock Gate, you can evoke or rescue someone on their 3-person mount on top of the root on the right side.
Grip, priest grip, a 2-seater mount as well because you can fade by the bears.
Fade by grip. You can shroud. You can mass invis from mage actually if they ever take that talent. Probably not.
Yeah,
probably not. You just
worst case, even you can use a B-res or a death skip or something like that.
Pull the pack to the side and meld also works.
Yeah, meld. So a lot of tech for it. Obviously, in a low key or whatever, in a weekly key, you can just fight him. But definitely not something. Definitely something to try and avoid if you're trying to start pushing in this dungeon. That's the plan. Okay, then there's flowers and keepers section and dryads, and the goal here, I guess, is skip as much as possible.
So I think you should probably pull up this VOD that we have of Ellesmere. So people do. So the dryads aren't linked to the flowers. I don't think anything's actually linked to the flowers in these packs. So people do a lot of, I would say, tech in regards to how they're skipping packs, where they'll sleepwalk. They'll like probably like sheep invis this pack in this group, something like that, to make sure that they're not pulling like dryads, and instead they want to just be pulling the flowers if at all possible. I guess they'll sap, right? They'll probably just use sap to be able to separate the dryad from the flowers. And as long as the flowers don't walk over the mob that's got that CC on them, then you should be able to get them. And then basically your only pull in this area is the one patrolling dryad, and then all of the free flowers that you can reasonably get, and it includes these first 2.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool ways to optimize this area. You can sleepwalk that first dryad out and pull the 2 flowers by themselves, first of all. You can sap imprison the second dryad that patrols around that pack to get by really easily, or you can use some other way to skip that pack. In this area, you can pull like the 4 flowers behind the house like they're about to right here. The tank uses a snap spot, like we mentioned earlier, to gather them quickly. You can actually use that to your advantage a lot of times. And then you typically want to focus on the dryad in this clip that we're watching right now before you do anything else.
I think this dryad looks like it's gonna go into their keeper, into that keeper pack. So the dryad will actually flee occasionally, and you want to if at all possible, Ursul's Vortex is probably the best ability to make sure it's not leaving melee.
But
it can do stuff like that
right into the and then the ignition, the ignite spread. It's just tragedy all around.
It's just so Jover whenever stuff like that happens.
So this is and then the keepers full heal the flowers, and this is just tragedy. So
the best way of avoiding this is to make sure that the dryad, your tank lines the dryad all the way into the house, is but it's like a time loss to do that. So
right.
You don't see, groups most of the time just kind of YOLO it and pray that the dryad doesn't do that.
Yeah.
There's another way to counterplay it actually. If all 5 members of the group stand on one side of the dryad will always go away from the group on its dash.
Oh my god, I would have.
Yeah.
I mean,
you just want to make sure that you're not standing in it'll always run. You want to make sure that you're never standing where if it runs away from you, it'll run into something, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's but obviously that's annoying or hard to do. Okay, then we get to the fear dwellers.
Do you lust these mobs or do you lust Oakheart?
I think on Fort we ended up lusting this pull with 8 flowers that we managed to get into this pull.
What? How?
That's good tech.
Okay, there's actually some sick tech you can do with the double keeper pack with Evoker +1 sap.
You just will sleepwalk the mob out of the pack or something.
So while you're fighting the dryad plus flower group, you sleepwalk 1 keeper off to the right, and then imprison it at the end of the sleepwalk, so it's stuck out there, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're ready to go, you sleepwalk the second keeper to the same spot, and then ring a piece them both away. So then you cross the whole area with all the flowers and bring them to the next pool.
Because Sleepwalk only has a 20-second cooldown. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is so stupid.
It's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, that's good tech. And then, so whether you're fighting the dwellers by themselves or with others, what do you need to know to do that pack successfully?
So
this is an example of what Ellesmere was talking about. Like these mobs, having to stop them constantly is pretty tough and hard because they do so much damage. But you need to assign kicks if you have to every single Fury guy. And if you don't have 5 kicks, you have to have like a plan for the 5th mob. And then you want to do like a clean CC rotation.
I think that kicks to get the mobs grouped is like the most important thing. You would prefer to be playing with the Vengeance Demon Hunter at this point in the key, right? Because they have chains and Silent Sigil to kind of control these mobs by themselves. But I think that like, you know, assigning kicks on the first 2 to 3 dwellers that you're pulling is nice. Because then it gets it locked up for the rotation.
I guess rule of thumb should probably be like melee specs plus the tank should always kick the first like 3 fear mobs that are closest to the group, and then the 2 range players should get the back 2 that are going to run in late because they have more time to set up for that kick.
Yeah.
Okay, then Oakheart encounter. I feel like
have you done this guy?
Yeah.
Have you done this guy on Paladin Dretnos?
Yeah. Blessing of Freedom, run through the roots, kill him. Is that good tech?
How do you feel about the breath mechanic on Paladin?
I stand in my consecrate and then I hold up my shield and it, you know.
Oh, interesting. You take the breath.
Yeah, I haven't done the key at a level where that doesn't work yet, so I can see how it would be a problem though.
I think almost every tank has to outrange that thing on high keys because there's so much tank damage.
I think Pally tank has to pre-horse.
That makes sense. Yeah. So okay, high keys. The breath is a leap away thing or something like that. Which that's
for
fun.
sure. You gotta save all your defenses for the grip. I think you double up on defenses a lot of time on the grip too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of cool things you can do as the group on this fight too. You can first of all you can stack up all the roots, in one place and make it really easy for the tank to pick up threat.
Nobody does that, but you could.
You can. It's nice. You can clear the roots with Blessing of Freedom. You can't. I don't think you can really do all the roots at once with any other spell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean you could have your Moonkin keep going. You know, cat bear between them. That's fun to make them do that. They
certainly
love
could ask a Moonkin.
You
to
could
do that.
ask them, but like
they're not gonna. But you could.
You can dodge the throw. So he does crushing grip on the tank, and then he throws the tank at a player. And if that player has like a very fast movement ability, they can dodge the hit. Actually,
I dodge it every time with Hover, like for point of reference. Does he pick furthest player at range for the target of the crushing grip, or is it just a ranged player?
I don't know.
I feel like it has to be furthest target at range, but like I don't know. I'm not confident in that. Might just be ranged player.
Okay, then we get to the fun excitement of the slimes in the Fury section.
So Slime's probably the most efficient mobs in the dungeon. Fury's probably the least efficient mobs in the dungeon. Just because they split off. I mean, the Keepers are probably worse, but like the Furies are bad because they split off into 4 mini mobs. Ideally, you're only pulling 1 Fury here, and it's with all the other blobs. That's pretty standard. And then you skip the second
big
guy.
Old pull. Yeah, the second guy is easily skippable without any tech. Just wait until it gets to that part of its patrol.
Yeah, you generally want to do like 1 pack of slimes plus the elemental. Wait to see if anyone dies in your pug to the first round of slimes, and then pull more slimes. Yeah. Maybe divide them into 2 on the next set because someone died.
Yeah, or
they do a lot of damage.
You used AMZ and rally and defensives on the first pack dying, so you don't want to fight 2 packs by themselves with no defensives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a lot of damage, especially if you kill them all in the exact same time. If you have somebody who's like this, Outlaw Rogue is kind of nice for this because they're only doing damage to like 5 of them, and so
this is where you want target cap specs.
Yeah, target cap kind of helpful defending. I guess 7 depends, but yeah, either way.
If you have a Disc Priest, you really want that Fury up. If you're pulling those slimes at all, if you pull the slimes without a target for the Disc Priest to hit, they're probably not going to be able to heal you.
Yeah.
True. That's a good consideration for Fire Mage too. You always want like 1 big target for something like that.
Then Dresseron, we have. Would you guys like taking the boss around the room and activating the Whelpies? Is that? You guys like going on a little adventure and making some
I think-
friends?
I think it kind of depends on what you're gonna do. If you're playing the disc, you actually need to keep him like on the far side of the room, like nearish where he spawns, and then the disc priest lodges himself onto the wall across the eggs to make sure he's not gonna get pushed back during the winds at all. Because disc on that fight needs to get up their Shadow Fiend every single set, and it's possible to get Shadow Fiend up every 25 seconds, which is perfect with the downdraft, but it requires them to press a global every single global. To be pressing smite over and over again, which they can't do if they have to run.
Can they get zoned out by the roar if they get
Yeah,
unlucky?
but there's like
There's
5
two
different
spots?
spots that you can stand
Okay.
on that. Like it's like below the ledge, and then it's like up, and it's like back, and then it's across, and then it's back down.
That's interesting. I didn't know that about this.
I couldn't find anybody doing it like a VOD. I looked through Growl's VOD. I couldn't find a VOD of him doing it on his priest. Although I know he does it regularly on Tyran. I just couldn't find any VOD of him doing it. But like that's like a big thing for disc. I feel like disc has the hardest time on this fight, generally speaking. I do like to grab funnel though. I think funnel on this fight's good.
Yeah, for a lot of specs, it does add a little bit of single target damage just by having some cleave onto the boss, which is what we call funnel.
Mhm.
Like Havoc Demon Hunter gets like 10% crit for 5 seconds whenever a new mob enters the battle. Stuff like that.
If you pull too many mobs though, your Outlaw Rogue's not gonna be able to hit the boss.
Well, they can still just main target the boss, but yeah.
Well, they keep Blade Flurry up on single
oh
target,
yeah,
right?
sure,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's always fun. I would recommend that, especially in pugs. Make as many as you can. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, in pugs you just go crazy. You just pull
you
like 30
literally-
whelps every time.
The eggs respawn after a bit of time, and your goal is to just on cooldown be cracking the eggs. That's a lot of fun.
Something I kind of want to know as well is the eggs. Whenever you walk over them, they do a little bit of initial damage. It's not like a ton, but it is a little bit. And if you're already knocked low by the roar and you walk over the eggs for whatever reason, you can die. So be cognizant of that.
Also, because you'll get initial threat on the whelpies and then get.
Might also get meleeed. Yeah.
Okay, then we have the log, the tree,
log.
the hole. What's the tech here?
Well, so there's actually a meta pull before the log
Okay.
that people are doing, and it's the bat pack that's up top before you drop down, plus the what is it,
Deadeye
double
Deadeye
stalker.
Yeah.
No, that's the other one.
Oh, the other one. Okay. Summoner,
Yeah, it's that
stalker, imp. Fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you
Okay.
tank that against like a rock, and you full stack into melee. I think probably the most important mob in that pack is the stalkers. The stalkers will leap at any target that is outside of like 8 yards range of them. So you need to make sure that you are like perfectly on top of them the entire time.
Yeah. Unlike the juggernauts, these just won't do their ability if everybody's in melee, right? So it's not one where you need somebody baiting. Yeah.
Right, and it's like hard melee requirement. Like you have to be able to whack the mobs with your stick, kind of melee requirement.
Summoner and Imp are, just kicks. Summoner casts Curse of Isolation, and then just some dread bolts or whatever.
Yeah, the
And
bolts, the summoner bolts are the most dangerous. They'll one shot your DPS. So everybody kicks the summoner except one person. One melee can solo the Imp's Dread Inferno cast.
Yeah,
That's the way you solve that whole pack.
yeah. Imp bolt is irrelevant mostly.
Okay, then we have the imp summoner, imp stalker summoner again.
Invis pot.
Okay, in this
Yeah.
spot here. What
Yeah,
about
these
the
pulls
four
are so
bats?
hard in high keys.
The bats
So
as
this-
well.
The bats you actually do pull typically now. They got nerfed at some point. They were doing like millions of damage, but they got nerfed. So you do like basically the pull that we just talked about again, where you pull these bats into the final pack, and then you do the exact same solution for the kicks, where one person's on the imp, everybody else is on the summoner.
Okay.
Have you ever lost this?
I think I don't know actually. It's either this or the last boss. Yeah, on Fort, it's either one or the other. On Turnicle, definitely the last boss.
It's definitely the boss. It's definitely the boss on Tyrant. I just don't know what it is on Fortified. Like I feel like we just 50-50 it. We're just like somebody just goes, yeah, and then somebody and then you just press lost on this on Fortified, and somebody
Yeah.
goes, no, and then you just don't lost it. You're like, or whatever.
Cool.
Kind of depends on it probably depends on your offensive CDs if your stuff's back up for whatever reason.
All right, then. So
Yeah.
then, boss itself. This one's kind
boss
of
actually-
nasty.
Can you pull up the VOD again and we can
Yeah.
kind of talk through this? You actually want to tank this boss in a very specific spot. So you want to tank this boss like in the corner where it spawns the entire time. So post 50%, there are circles that come down from the sky that put a 5% damage amp on the boss that stack all the way up to 10. By basically they spawn either on players or they spawn ambiently, like on fixed locations around the room. And by tanking him in the corner, kind of this spot, like a little bit further in the corner than where this group has it right now, you're able to avoid the ambient room spawns. You're not going to avoid the player fixed spawns, which just is what it is. But by avoiding the ones that spawn relative to the room, it's less of a chance of the boss getting stacks.
The boss gets stacks. It's very unforgiving. Like this
Correct.
one right here, that still got a stack, even though it was like only just the very edge of the hitbox of the circle touching the boss. So it's a lot. Like even this one's gonna hit by a mile, right? That one there. You got to take the boss all the way. Like those ones even almost hit, except they were able to dodge them. You have to be like really far away from the circle for it to not actually amp the boss, and it's a really long buff, and it refreshes duration if the boss gets a new stack. So can make the boss extremely lethal. Yeah.
On God, if you're playing triple ranged on this fight, it makes the fight much easier too, because then you have 3 people playing at range that are just like protecting one another, because then the melee can group up with the tank as well, because the tank's never going to get targeted with anything. So say if you have either the fear or the silence circle, like you're always free to either stand opposite of the tank or on top of the tank, and you'll be totally fine.
Yeah, the more range you have, the less swirlies you have in melee. It's a big help.
Yeah, also that.
You typically, so like in high keys on this boss, the last thing I'd say is you pop CDs on pull if you have them, and then you lust at 50% or like close to 50% whenever somebody has CDs next, because you don't want to blow all your CDs on pull with lust and then just be sitting in P2 for most of the fight doing no damage and dodging swirlies.
It's faster to do it like that.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on what the timer situation is looking like, right? Like if you really needed to go, then I think you'd probably still want to just send everything on pull, but
that's true. Yeah, I mean P2 lust is definitely a safe lust, but generally you do have time at this point if you made it this far.
Everything on this fight's meldable as well, so
yeah, that's another thing. Is I think you should save your meld for P2 when it's more dangerous. Typically the boss will have 2 or 3 stacks in P2, making it more of a one shot.
Yeah,
I prefer to meld feed as opposed to Nightmare Bolt personally, but it just kind of depends. If you're worried about getting one shot by the Nightmare Bolt, then it is what it is. Feed does a bit more, but obviously it's healable, so there's a bit more counterplay.
Feed also doesn't show on target to target. He shows like he's targeting the tank.
Yeah,
you gotta look at the debuff for feed.
So you gotta either look at the little beam he's putting on somebody, or you have like something indicating on your party frames.
Yeah. My party frames indicate it with debuff, but I guess that's not. I don't know. Might not be standard. Sure.
All right, that's it for Darkheart Thicket. And that means it's time for us to thank our patrons and then depart the show for the week. So let's do that now. Our lovely patrons include, I hope everyone enjoys the Teary McTearface tie. Was there a tie on one of them? Or is this, maybe there's supposed to be Tear and the R didn't get copied?
Oh, it was Tear. It was
supposed to be Tear, okay, and Tuttles didn't copy in the R. That's we're not starting off well on the Patreon names here.
Oh, no.
This world will burn with the Master's return. Who's got 2 thumbs and is ready to play some alts? This guy. Never Nude, Ja, King of Skills, Chromed, Trekkie, Chewy. We know what Nerf Tank does when there's overlap CC, but what does he do if there's overlap interrupts? Salty Senny, ZivXX, Necris, Tegtil, Nevuk, Eevee, Year of the Sphere is extended into 2023, bless up. No Trick, I Forgot I Was Subbed Here, Dimat, Rework Mistweaver, Nyx. I thought I was crazy for having 4 max tunes in SOD, but now that I have 5 and I'm thinking about 6, I've come to realize I am indeed the problem. Gallic, Brusif, Dratnostraps Abyss. When do we get the Burt story? M Sanity, Xena, Rogue is now good enough for Prog, but still bad enough to be sat for SLG, bless up. Red Color, YouTube.com/Workbringer, Alphabet Soup, Druid Friends of Nevermore, #1 Simsky for Trelsky. Lurka would like to remind everybody that loose mobs in the back are a lifestyle choice and shouldn't be scorned at in every key. Milk, Zife, Pone, Windwalker Mug Steel with nerfs by rolling with the punches. Thesaurus.com is a powerful tool. By the way, Windwalker kind of sleeper OP, I think.
I don't know if OP is how I describe Windwalker.
Sleeper not bad anymore.
Yeah,
it's good now. Yeah, it's good.
The Marsh Hare. My raid buff is my great personality and good looks. I play Ellie Shaman. Congratulations on the buff. Thank you for listening to the Titanforge podcast. It's brought to you by Daddy Dratty, Grampy Trelsky, and the Tettles Effect. Big Head Small Brain, King's Honor Fellow Horde is me, your newest guild member, Juniper. Tettles spreading misinformation on the internet again.
That could not be me. That is not
Jato
me.
and Honeychug forever. Shotzi, that moment in your tank says, now where's my range at during Jade Serpent Dragon Boss and bricks your key. Feral Druids in the MDI, you've got to be kidding me. Oh, you don't have that yet? Boom. Sire Dematicus versus Smolderon Weasley. The small mammal living in Dranos' shirt.
Weasley.
Sapphire. Zalatath can corrupt my dagger any day. The real war within is the one within my heart. Smolderon has fallen just in time for the Tindral nerfs. Grats. I'm losing my rage to Neltharion weak auras. I can definitely believe it's not butter. Rock and Stone. Who would win a Titanforge staring contest? #1 Mythic Guild with a 1-day-a-week raid schedule and a bunch of Canadians NA. The least sentient tank NA. And I am Dratnos, destroyer of the Lego. And Francis. Thank you all for the support. Cool, and I guess we already did our Q&A back while Ellesmere was still here, so we are all done for the week. That's it for episode 200, another exciting one.
A little nice 2-hour show, you know?
Yeah, another nice. Well, we started a little bit late, so I think it's only going to end up being like an hour and a half in the, in the
Oh,
final
that's true.
length.
That's true.
But yeah.
You want to answer one final Q&A?
Okay, one final bonus Q&A, Proc.
All right, it was asked in Discord. It says, "What is your opinion on racials being so important? Nelf/dwarf in Mythic Plus."
Hate it.
I've always been annoyed by it. I hate that all my tunes have to be dwarf.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, me too. I hate, like, my characters are, I mean, a lot of them are just whatever they first were when I first made them, but a lot of them now are just randomly dwarves or night elves or, troll or goblin or whatever from whatever fights they needed to swap to those for. Or M+, also, like, dwarf for a guy for M+ or something for a season. Like, I don't like it for that reason, and I don't like it because it just randomly sometimes ints some classes, because it's like, well, druids can't be dwarves, so, haha.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, that sucks whenever that's happening to you.
Do you think that, like, current dwarf/Nelf are, like, stronger than old Arcane Torrent? I feel like it's about actually the same level.
I think it's
I think it's
close.
about the same,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like Arcane Torrent, you would at least play 1 or 2 of those in most dungeons if you could. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Arcane Torrent and I think that was just thinking about Legion.
Yeah.
Arcane Torrent and Legion was actually required.
Yeah.
It was so strong for doing all the pulls.
I mean, it's required for what? Court of Stars, which we played which we played in season 1 without Arcane Torrent.
I think there was Cathedral Arcane Torrent stuff, right? I think there was. I think Seat had a big Seat definitely was required.
Seat had big Arcane Torrents, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess they're less
Arcway?
required now, but I think you would still want one. Like, it's still powerful, right? Like, imagine you just go into the Everbloom, first boss, pre-pull or whatever. You just have an extra torrent for that. That's
Oh, you probably could do the whole
Seems
entire
really nice.
room in Everbloom with a bunch of torrents.
yeah.
Like the first boss room. Just do the whole entire thing.
Yeah, that'd be insane. Like, exactly. Stuff like that used to be like solved by Arcane Torrent. It was a mass silence back then, basically.
First pull of Blackrook would also be a lot easier. I don't know.
I think you'd still want night elves for a lot of dungeons, though. So I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things, sort of like Covenants, where it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about, but the fact that you can't actually swap between them without paying a bunch of money to Blizzard every time you do means that it goes from being like a fun gameplay thing to solve to just being like really obnoxious, in my opinion. So that's why I don't like them. I would love it if they just made a bunch of good different racial abilities and then let you swap between them and like detach them from the races, and it was just like one extra ability that everybody got was some kind of signature ability like that. I'd be fine with that, but I just
Or if
don't
they
like
just
them
made
being tied to the race.
If they made the Atomic Recalibrator a 1-hour CD instead of a 12-hour CD, solved in my mind.
Oh, and it actually changed.
Oh,
your...
it actually changed your race?
Oh no, you're just saying you could use it for cosmetics. Yeah, but I like the idea of like playing Night Elf in one dungeon and Blood Elf in another dungeon and like Dwarf in another.
Okay,
dungeon.
that would be better. Yeah,
he's not talking about aesthetically.
I actually was talking about aesthetic.
I care a little bit about that. I do. But yeah, it's not my biggest issue with it. But I agree that would be nice too. Recalibrator.
I don't normally even care about my transmog at all. I just don't like being dwarf on every single character, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. All right, that is finally it for us this week. We will be back next week probably with another one. Later, gamers.
GG's.